This next one was sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Citizen Beeswax. If that is indeed his real name.
Well, now I can believe that name.
Hi, Jim and Brian. How are you? I'm fine.
Well, we're good too.
Recently, I was watching a shoot interview with Shane Douglas, where he discusses how Scott Hall would sabotage their matches by throwing off the timing. He uses terms such as the stutter step and lead ass. This was the first time I had heard these terms in wrestling. What do they exactly mean, and can you elaborate a little bit on how wrestlers can sabotage each other by disrupting the timing of specific spots during a match? This topic fascinates me because I haven't heard it talked about too much. Thank you and keep up the great work.
Well, lead ass kind of speaks for itself. You can either go up for somebody or make it easy for them to lift you or move you around or put you in position where you need to be, or then you can have lead in your ass and it's like an act of Congress to do the same thing. Or that can, make you look shitty, even though the person that you're trying to lift or move or throw or whatever is the one doing it. It makes you look like a piece of shit. Or the stutter step, trying to, for example, when you see the guys that can really hit the ropes well, Brian, right? When they're hitting the ropes, you're doing a crisscross and everybody's smooth, right? Like Shawn Michaels in his day, hitting
Terry
those
Gordy.
ropes, or Terry Gordy hitting the cables, where everything's smooth and everybody's moving at the same speed, and then they do a spot, a drop down, leapfrog, whatever the fuck, right? Drop kick. If one of those people varies their fucking step or pace, a stutter step, not a full stride, and you can make it look as you're turning to hit the ropes, you can just throw a little fucking halfway stutter step in there and throw the whole goddamn fucking thing off. And then it looks like the other guy, but not you. If he's going up for a drop kick, a guy that's going up for a drop kick when a guy's coming off the ropes, the guy that's drop kicking is leaping up in the air while the other guy is still into the ropes and is bowing them out and preparing to come off, right? You've got to have that timing. And when you feel that crisscross or the fucking movement or what, to jump, boom, the guy's going to be there. Well, if the guy takes that stutter step, he's going to be there maybe a second and a half late, and that's all it takes, and you fall on your ass or you look like a fucking idiot. Or whatever the fuck. It just, the better a worker that a guy is, the more he is able to make you look either fantastic or like a complete piece of shit. Whichever one he wants to. It just depends. And the guy fucking the deal up will not look like the guy to the fans that's fucking the deal up. It'll be the other guy.
To the specific example that he cited in the question, Shane Douglas and Razor Ramon, Scott Hall. What do you remember about that? Because there obviously were some chemistry issues, and I think there was a story later on, maybe a couple of years later in ECW. Scott Hall tried to go to a show maybe in Florida, and Candido and Douglas wouldn't let him in. Because they had both, Candido felt very similar about the way the Clique treated him. But do you remember anything about Shane Douglas and Scott Hall?
Well, now, back up to the start of the question, which one said the other one was, Shane Douglas said Scott Hall was stutter stepping him and sandbagging him, right? Yes, well, I can believe that. Here's the thing. I know Shane, was a good athletic worker back in those days. He started getting a little heavy and, everything in ECW and the injuries and et cetera. But if you couldn't, Scott Hall could work with almost anybody, and Shane was not a fucking slouch either. But if you couldn't have a fucking match with Candido, then that just meant either you can't have a fucking match, and since we know Scott Hall could have a match, that meant he didn't want to, because he didn't see those guys. It was all part of the Clique thing. He didn't see those guys as on his level, and he shouldn't be, not only should he not be booked with them, but also that's the kind of shit that they did to make their point when they said, oh, this guy's a shits, because they were going to push Shane for a while there. Poor Chris was always doomed as soon as he became a body Donna. But, they would tell Vince that, oh, this guy's a shits, he can't work, or he's too indie, or he's too outlaw, or whatever. And then if Vince saw a fucking match and the guy looked like shit, that would reinforce their position. I'd never seen anything like this. That's why I was fucking miserable most of the time when those guys were there, because I'd never seen shit going on like this to this extent, out in the open. Nobody knew anything about it. Fucking lunacy.
Beyond the Click, and besides the poorly thought out Dean Douglas gimmick, did Shane rub people the wrong way up there, or was Shane fitting in? How was Shane?
No,
received?
Shane rubbed people the wrong way, obviously, because they didn't. The gimmick was the shits, and I think everybody knew that. And the Click did not want Dean Douglas. The whole thing, it was silly in their midst. Shane was a good worker, but also Shane at that point had been convinced by Paul Lee that he was better than he was. So of course he's rubbed some people the wrong way, because he was better than Dean Douglas, but he wasn't probably as good at that point in time as fucking Paul Lee had made him think he was. So that mid-90s Shane, it was kind of back him. And then he just started going on the tangents about Flair. Yes, when Flair was the fucking booker, he held him down because he was a fucking dynamic dude, and that was a rotten fucking gimmick too. And then they used Shane and Steamboat as a team, and I guess that when another time Flair got in power. But
no. Flair was in WWF when they did that.
Okay, but then it was...
He had just returned to WCW, excuse me.
Okay, but was there another incident? Was Shane Douglas mad at Ric Flair all these years over the way he held him down when he was a booker because of just the 89-90 booking run, or was there more in the early 90s WCW?
Shane, I think, returned to WCW at the end of 92, and he was there through early 93, and then they made Steamboat and Douglas Dos Hombres so they could put Tom Zink under a mask and people thought it was Shane. Flair had just come back. I don't know how much power Flair had when he first came back, because that was when Bill Watts got pushed out or quit and Eric Bischoff took over. So.
Well, the point is, and that was Shane Douglas's best period in the ring, if not in the business. In the ring, he and Steamboat, remember when the Heavenly Bodies went in, we worked with them, including an 8-man tag. It was Midnight and the Freebirds, I think, wasn't it? No, it was the Midnight and the Blondes. My God, Midnight and Pillman and Austin against the Rock and Roll Express and Steamboat and Douglas, and an 8-man from Gainesville, Georgia. And that was a fun match. And it was a good, but then it was kind of embarrassing because the Rock and Roll and the Bodies were there part-time, and the people started chanting for the Rock and Roll while Steamboat and Douglas were their world tag team champions. Riggy Morton selling the Rock and Roll were more over than their champions at that point. So that was a little embarrassing. But nevertheless, that was Shane's best era in the ring. But in that case, I thought, honestly, all these promos, all these years that Shane had been cutting on Flair, something happened when Shane was more of a top guy in WCW in the 90s, because I can tell you exactly what fucking the whole problem was. We've talked about it on the show. When the dynamic dudes could only work with the Midnight Express because Jim Herd hated both teams. So we did that deal where the dudes fooled me into signing a contract where I got a single match with Shane on TV to draw a rating, which it did, a 3.2, as I recall. Try to get one of those these days, kids. And Shane got mad because I was going to throw the powder in his eyes and blind him, get some heat on him for a minute or two before he made a big comeback and bumped me around, and then they beat me, and then the fucking Midnight jumped and we continued our program. And after we shot it in Greensboro and it got over and everything went fine, he called Jim Herd and said, I don't think I should be having to wrestle Jim Cornette on Saturday night TBS because I'm a serious athlete. And we, blah, 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 or whatever the fuck. And Herd, of course, was primed to do anything to mess with Flair's booking. And he was the booker and had approved this entire show. So he made us reshoot it, where I came out with the sling on my arm and fucking put Stan in the match, I believe, instead. And it still drew a rating because the people didn't know they were getting baited and switched, but they were baited and switched. And not only did then that was to lead up, as we've mentioned, to the Midnight Express versus Bodies, or Midnight Express versus Dudes matches, where they would win and get 5 minutes with me to get even for all the shit we'd done to him. But Flair heard that Shane had called Herd and gone over his head and said, basically, this fucking preliminary guy called a goddamn boss on my fucking booking. Fuck him. So we just beat them all the time, and they only once or twice out of like 30 matches ever got the 5 minutes with me, and never really got even with the Midnight Express. And since Herd hated both those teams, but Flair knew the Midnight Express were obviously a team he wanted to use, he just fucking stopped booking the goddamn Dynamic Dudes. I can't believe I never knew that was the extent of the heat all these years. The Dick Flair promos and the shit where Shane would challenge Flair and call him over the hill.
Flair is dead. Those ECW fans were chanting, Flair is dead. Just from that,
Shane's a smart, now that I think about this, unless there's some other reason, I'd love to hear about it. But I like Shane as a person, but I found out a few years ago, you can't believe anything he says. He's not only a fucking bad Trump fuck, but he's a conspiracy theorist on everything. He believes all this shit. He thought Trump was a great president. Hillary Clinton was fucking murderer. And all these things that you see these fucking nutcases believe on the goddamn news, he thinks is a real deal. So he probably thought that Ric Flair, just because Flair, a year later, if he hadn't gone on, if Shane hadn't gone on about it, Flair might not even have fucking remembered. But that was Flair's fucking impression of Shane Douglas, this fucking preliminary babyface called over my head as I'm the booker, and who the fuck is this guy? And Shane Douglas at the time was nobody. And Shane never got to the point where he was 75% of Ric Flair in the standing in the community to begin with. But at the time, he's a fucking preliminary guy, calls the fucking boss on the booker. What did he think was going to happen? Shane was a school teacher. How did he think that was going to fucking play? Here's another thing. Now that I think about it, this modern day wrestling, these human relations departments or human resources, right? And all these goddamn corporate ownership, the fucking job guys and the curtain jerkers do have the ability to call the fucking boss and complain about the main event talent.
Even the merchandise weasels do.
Even the merchandise weasels, which is why there's another of the many reasons we're in the shit we're in. Here's my fucking thing. It's always everybody on the card is one of the boys. Everybody on the card needs to be treated with respect in the locker room. But if the fucking guy jerking the curtain in the first match calls the booker or the boss actually calls the promoter to complain about the booker, or calls the booker to complain about the main event guy, you're a fucking idiot, and you need gone quickly, and you ain't gonna make it in this fucking business.